Welcome back, my friends, to another chapter of COBOL goodness. Today we are going to have a look at the structure of COBOL programs. This means we're going to first look at the layout of COBOL code. Then we're going to look at divisions and sections, which are the parts that a COBOL program is divided into. And finally, we'll have a quick look at the punctuation that is used in COBOL programs. First, let's look at the layout of the code. So here recall the Hello World program from our introductory video, and you may notice that there are certain indentations here in the code, and I indicated it in the 0 row here, that we have the first 7 columns which are empty except for those stars here. Then in the eighth column the actual code begins, and the program logic is actually moved out to column 12. And we can actually see this very nicely in Visual Studio if we have a look at our source code there. Here we see that because we've installed the plugin for COBOL, that you have these vertical lines that indicate those structurings. So if you look at the column counter down here, we see that those start comment lines start at column 7, that the actual code starts at column 8, and the program logic, the code in the procedure division, starts at column 12. So this is beautifully indicated by these helpful vertical lines. And here in line 73 we actually have the end of the code, so no code may actually go past this line here. Now you may wonder, where does this actually come from? And it actually comes from Punchcards, because at the time when COBOL was introduced, Punchcards were still widely used to contain program code, and thus the COBOL language was designed to accommodate being written on Punchcards. And you see Punchcards obviously have certain physical limitations. Here you see actually the printed COBOL command. So we have one line of COBOL code per Punchcard. And you see that every letter in the COBOL command corresponds to one column on the card. You can even see that corresponding letters here. For example, the I in if and the I in numeric have exactly the same holes. So, well, that's what you would expect. And the version we see here is the IBM 80 column format with 12 rows that was introduced in 1931. So much older than COBOL actually, but as I said, it was still in use, widely in use when COBOL was introduced. And interestingly, Punchcards have been around since the late 19th century even. They were introduced by Hermann Hollerith and first applied in the census in the United States in 1890. So what we see here is actually an advanced model. Let's take a closer look at what the different areas in the code mean. Columns 1 to 6, so these were the empty columns at the beginning of the code, so these will be ignored by the compiler. And historically, when we actually wrote our program on Punchcards, then this area contained line numbers for the code, and the reason for this was that if you ever mixed up a batch of Punchcards, like you drop them to the floor, they get all mixed up, and then you want to sort them again, then of course it would be helpful to have the line numbers for each card, so for each instruction, to put them in the right order again. And yeah, in theory you could write some short comments at this part of the code, but that will probably not help the readability. So it's just best to leave it blank. Column 7. So this is a special column that is usually left blank, but if it's not left blank, we can either have a star or a slash to indicate that this line is a comment line, or we can have a capital D to indicate that this is a line that contains debugging information, or we can have a dash or a minus if this line is used to continue an alphanumerical literal from the previous line. So since we have a strong limitation in the length of the lines in COBOL code, and if we would exceed the 73 line column limit in one line, then we could continue that line using a dash in column 7 on the next line. Columns 8 to 11 are called area A, and the headers of divisions, sections and paragraphs in the code start here, and as well as the top level declarations of variables. So column 8 is where the actual code starts, but notice some parts of the code start only in column 12, so this is the so-called area B. And here the main part of the code is written, so instructions and declarations of components of records, so more complex variables. Finally, columns 73 to 80 are ignored by the compiler. And again, this had historical use when you actually used cardboard punch cards, that you could store the name of the program here, or at least the first 8 letters. But yeah, on a digital file, there's no use for that. So it's being ignored. And in fact, GNU COBOL, when we use it with the IBM COBOL standard, strictly observes these line limits. So if you write your code beyond column 72, so if you get into this area or beyond, then you will most likely get an error because GNU COBOL will not accept this as valid input for the code. Yeah, and if you go beyond column 80, then this is of course not used by COBOL because Punchcards historically only had 80 columns. So any column beyond 80 simply does not exist in COBOL world. Let's have a look again at our punch cards. So here I used arrows to indicate the different sections that we just looked at. So here from 1 to 7, those used to be the line numbers. And yeah, here they are just filled with the column number. So in this example, they're not really used. This is the column that would indicate if we have a comment or a debug line or a continuation of the previous line, also not used in this example here. Then we have area A, which, since if you look at the instruction here, this is just an ordinary instruction from the program logic. So it's not a header of some section. So this area is also left blank, and we actually start at the beginning of area B with our COBOL instruction here. And yeah, as I said before, you can check that the same letters up here indeed have the same combination of holes in the corresponding column. And the final section after the valid code area starts here at column 73, and also on this particular punch card it is not used. And if you want to know more about punch cards, I strongly recommend you go to the YouTube channel Robert Elder Software, because he has a video on his channel where he bought a complete set of COBOL punch cards, or a complete program from the IRS for tax declarations, I think. And he goes through the program and yeah, has a lot of interesting explanations on it. So yeah, if this is interesting for you, then I recommend you watch the video on Robert Elder Software, and I will put a link to it into the description box below. Let's see how we structure a program logically in COBOL. So we're having a look at divisions and sections. Recall, COBOL programs were meant to resemble written English. So the structure of COBOL programs is made in a way that it resembles human readable books or reports. So this is quite different from the programming languages that we are normally used to. And COBOL is hence divided into divisions. And those can be further divided into sections, and sections can sometimes be further divided into paragraphs. Now the divisions in a COBOL programs have fixed names and purposes, so there are at most 4 of them. There's the identification division, which contains some metadata about the program. The environment division, which contains information about the hardware that the program is running on and the files that are used during the operation. The data division, where we define variables that are used in the program. And finally, the procedure divisions, which contains the actual program logic. And if we use any data or variables here, then it must have been defined previously in the data division. Now these divisions can further be subdivided into sections. For the identification division, there are no further sections, but there are for the environment and data division, and they have fixed section names, and we will have a look in a minute. And in the procedure division here, where the program logic resides, we can define our own sections, and so we can choose the section names freely. And yeah, we can use these sections in the way that we would use functions in other programming languages, or we can use them as labels for go-to instructions, or simply as markers to logically structure our program for readability. So you've seen a little bit of this in Hello World already. Now here's the general outline of how these divisions and sections would work. So we'll begin with the identification division, which has information about the current program. So for example, the program ID. Then comes the environment division, which has information on how to interact with external files and machine. The data division, where we define the data that is being used throughout the processing of the program. And the procedure division, which contains the actual program code, the logic of what is being done with the data. And yeah, here we can define freestyle names for the sections. Now let's have a look at the individual divisions. So first we have the identification division, which has to come first in the COBOL program, and it is declared by simply writing identification division as a header. This is an optional division, so we don't have to do it, and it contains metadata about the program, namely those paragraphs here. Program ID, which is just the name of the program that doesn't have to be identical to the source file name. We can include information on the author, on the installation, so where the program is running. This does refer to a physical location, and information on when the program was written and compiled. So this can be filled in any way you like, so they are free-form strings. And they cannot be filled automatically. So maybe you would think that date written or date compiled is always automatically set to the last date when you saved the file or when you ran the compiler, but nope, you have to do that by hand. So it might be more convenient to just leave it out. What is relevant here is program ID, because you can supply different options to this that might change the program's behavior. And if we ever need one of these, I will cover it then, so I'm not going into that here. It's also important to have the program ID if you modularize your program. So if you have multiple subprograms in COBOL, which roughly correspond to functions or procedures or libraries if you want, then you will have to have an identification division for each subprogram, and you can use the program ID to call them. Next is the environment division with the corresponding header in the source code. And this division contains information about the machine that our program is supposed to run off, and also about the files, the external files that are being used by the program. And this can be omitted, so if you don't use any files and you don't care about providing information about the machines, you don't need this division. And you have two optional sections in the environment division. The first being the configuration section. And this contains information about the computers that are used for compilation and for execution of the program. So we have the two paragraphs, source computer and object computer, for that. And it also has a special names section, or paragraph to be precise. And here we can change certain settings in the program, mostly for appearances, so locales, currency signs, or the representation of the decimal point. For example, you could change it from a period to a comma, shape of cursors and stuff like that. So you will very rarely use this. Then there's the input-output section, which is probably much more important. So here we have entries where we declare the physical files and the logical files that are used by the program. This is done in the file control paragraph. And you can also indicate the ways how the file is being accessed and how the data in it is stored or read. And there's another paragraph, I/O control, that allows you to specify that multiple files can share the same input and output memory buffers. Now, if I will ever need any of this during this course, I will give you some more details on that, but not for now. The third division in COBOL program is the data division. So this is where we declare the variables that we will use and where we define the data structures that will be used by the program. And the next chapter will be dedicated to how data is declared and used in COBOL. So we'll have a lot more detail on that then. And the important sections in the data divisions are the following three. First, the file section. Now, if we previously declared an external file in the environment division, then here is where we define the data structure that is written to the file. So if you want, this is the serialization section. Here we define data structures that, if we read or write to the file, would be as a block written to that file. The working storage section is where we define the temporary variables used in the current program. So this is all our working variables for the running program will be defined here. And we can define elementary data types here, or more complex data structures, which are called records in COBOL. Now, there's an important thing to note about these records, or data structures in general in COBOL. When we define them, they're all singletons. So even though these records in a way resemble structs or classes from the usual programming languages, where we define abstract data types that we can then instantiate into different instances, this is not the case in COBOL. So if we define such a record in COBOL, then it corresponds to one variable. And we cannot create multiple instances of it. That's something you have to keep in mind. It's not very convenient. So the usual way to process multiple instances, I suppose, would be to have them stored in a file and read them into this record one after another, process them one after another. But we cannot have several instances of one record unless we define it in an array. We will get to that in the next video when we talk about data types. And then there's the linkage section. So as the name indicates, this is when we link programs together with the compiler. So if we write several COBOL programs and we want to link them together into one program, then here in this linkage section, we can define an interface for the different COBOL programs to communicate with one another. So more precisely, we define input arguments and return values for a subprogram. And finally, the fourth division, and probably most important one, is the procedure division, because here's the actual program logic. So in what happens here is not too different from the programming languages you're used to. So we start at the beginning of the procedure division, and then a COBOL program just is a sequence of instructions that are executed from top to bottom until we reach a stop run instruction, and then the program stops, as you would expect. And you can redirect the program flow through branching or control structures such as if conditions or via calls to subroutines. So we will get into the details of that in a later video. And as I indicated before, the procedure division can be further divided into sections with freely chosen names, but they have to be followed by the keyword section. They have to be ended by a period, and they begin in area 1, so from column 8 on. And these sections can be further subdivided into paragraphs, which are also written in area 1, but they require no keywords. So the paragraph name, you can just write the arbitrarily chosen name, end it with a period, but you do not have to write paragraph behind it or something like that, unless with a section where you have to follow them by the keyword section. However, the paragraph name must be unique within the section in which you define it. So you can have in different sections, you can use the same paragraph names, but within one section, of course, you must have unique paragraph names. Both sections and paragraphs can serve multiple purposes. So the simplest one would be just as headers to structure the program's code for readability. We can use them as labels for a go-to instruction, which of course is frowned upon nowadays because it leads to unreadable code. And we can use them as identifiers for procedure calls. So there's a perform instruction in COBOL which allows you to do procedure calls using a section or a paragraph name. And if you do this, then a section or a paragraph may contain an exit instruction. So this is like a return instruction in other programming languages. And once you reach this exit instruction, you will branch back to the original procedure call and continue program execution there. Now, style-wise, it is up to you to decide to which extent you want to combine sections and paragraphs. So it is indeed the case that some developers decide to only use one of the two, to either only exclusively use sections or exclusively use paragraphs just for readability. But yeah, you can combine them as you see fit. So here another schematic of a COBOL program. Let's focus on the procedure division here. So the procedure division, of course, is initialized by the division header. And then we have several different sections here with freely chosen names. I just call them alpha to omega. So alpha followed by the keyword section and a period. Here we have omega, section, period. And within alpha, we have some paragraphs also with freely chosen names. So I just call them alpha 1, alpha 2, and so on. And here we end them with a period, but we do not have any keyword following them. And yeah, so in these sections you can have whatever code is necessary. And similar down here for our omega section, we can also have several different paragraphs within that sections with freely chosen names. And I will discuss the different settings in these divisions in more detail as we go along in this course. So there's no point giving you too much detail now because you might just forget it anyway. And it's probably better to discuss it when we actually use it and have examples to understand it better. Now, a very exhaustive reference for these divisions can be found in chapters 4 to 7 of the GNU COBOL Programmer's Guide, which you find on the website of GNU COBOL, and I will also put a link of it in the description box. This is a very, very exhaustive reference. It's a bit dry, but actually quite good. So if you're really interested in COBOL, it is a good place to look up stuff. Okay, finally, let's look at punctuation that is used in COBOL. And we have certain punctuation marks, mainly commas and periods, that we can use to separate headers, keywords, names, constant, and to structure the code. First, let's look at the commas. So these are more for readability than actually doing anything in the code. And you can use them to optionally separate arguments in subroutine calls. So you don't have to use them, but you can use them just for readability. And it is recommended that you then follow them by a space, because otherwise it could lead to confusion if the compiler has been set to use the comma instead of a decimal point. Because in some European countries, for example, it is customary to use a comma as a decimal point, and COBOL allows you to change this. And in that case, if you don't separate the arguments here by spaces, it might confuse the compiler. Otherwise, as I said, their only purpose is to enhance readability. So the compiler treats them like white spaces. Periods are a bit more serious. So they have to be used when we end any header of a division or a section or a paragraph. We end variable declarations with a period and any sentence within the code. Sentence, what does that mean? A sentence in COBOL is a group of instructions within a common context. So for example, take an if-else condition. If you have different instructions within either the if or the else branch, then you should not separate them by periods, because the period would then indicate that this branch is over. It's not always completely clear, at least to me, when to use periods and when not. Like, it's pretty clear in this example with the if-else condition. Otherwise, the rules seem a bit arbitrary, but you'll get used to it. Okay, so here we have an example for using periods and for different effects if you don't use periods in COBOL. Here we have a little if-else branch. So we have a variable loan balance and we check if it's below 10,000. Then we compute the interest by multiplying by 0.04. Or if it's above or equal to 10,000, then we compute the interest by multiplying with 0.045. And then we want to display the interest amount with a display interest amount equal to interest call. And here it's important to note if we use a period here at the end of this multiply instruction. Because if we use this code here, then the compiler will interpret as if this display instruction belongs still to the else branch of the if-else instruction. So this will only be displayed if we actually have a loan balance of greater or equal 10,000. Alternatively, we could place a period here after the multiply. In that case, the compiler will think, okay, that else branch is over after this period, and the display instructions will be used in any case. So we will display the interest amount no matter what the loan balance is. And this shows you the importance of using proper punctuation in COBOL. For readability, it would actually be recommended to end the if-else condition with an end if period. I would recommend you always do that, but just for the sake of instruction, I omitted this here to show you what a carelessly omitted period can do or not do. Let's maybe have a look at this in GNU COBOL to actually confirm that it works as we expect it would. So here we have our loan balance program, and it might be interesting to see that we have the divisions here, the identification division, the data division to declare a loan balance and an interest variable. And I'm not going into the details now what this all means, because that's a topic for the next video. And here we have the procedure division, where we will compute our loan balance and show the interest amount. The interesting part is now this. So here we have the if-else condition. If loan balance less than 10,000, we multiply by this. And if it's greater or equal 10,000, we multiply by this. And here I have the version where I do not have a period after the else branch. So let's compile this and see what happens. We use the -x flag for the COBOL compiler to say that we want to have an executable. We use IBM as the standard flag. And then loanbalance.cob as our input file. Yeah. And you see what we get. We have a value of greater than 10,000 here for our loan balance. And so we get into the else branch and the interest amount is shown. Now we'll change this to a value smaller than 10,000, so 1,234, smaller than 10,000. So here we would execute the first part of the if condition. And you see here, we do not get displayed the interest amount because this is considered to be part of the else condition by the compiler. And since we get into the actual if condition here, we will not enter this part where the display of the interest amount would happen. Now let's see how that works. If we put the period here, in that case we expect that in both cases we will see the interest amount here. And indeed it works. So with a period here, even with a loan balance of less than 10,000, we get shown the interest amount at the end. And this is what we would expect. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and please like this video and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next chapter.